Okay, all right. Okay, call order, flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We have two consent agendas. Let's go with A, Planning Commission minutes dated June 9th.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. B, Planning Commission special meeting minutes dated July 1.
Make a motion that we've had.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, topics from the floor. Just my wife, so.
Hey.
You got any beef? Okay.
And nobody in Zoom land, so other than great.
There you go.
I tried real hard to be in Zoom land, but I'm going to have remedial Zoom land teaching.
Okay, well, we can try to help you out.
Or never do it again.
Okay, at this point in time, I am going to recuse myself because this number 4 public hearing agenda is about
The script.
Go ahead. Winging it.
We'll get out of here.
Oh, sorry.
Bye, Russ. You go sit at the other table.
Yeah.
We want to talk to
At the
you.
kids' table.
Yeah.
Let's see.
So your application is the Bennett Building, Russ? Is that?
Yeah.
So you
I'll be back for that one.
We're gonna let Jennifer have that one. It's all your baby. I was gonna hand you my notes ahead of
She
time.
doesn't care about it.
Oh, no.
I didn't get that out of sequence, did I? Did I read that? The Bennett Building? Okay, yeah.
No, I'm giving you that time.
Time is now 7:03 p.m. and the public hearing is now open. The quasi-judicial land use hearing. The subject of this hearing is a request for a conditional use permit and 2 variances. The subject property is identified on the county assessor's map, lot 305 on map 4N1W 4AC. The applicant is Russ and Mary Bird. Water is the same. That's why he recused himself for this particular hearing. Because quasi-judicial proceedings require the observance of certain procedural formalities, we will take on a few moments to cover some preliminary matters and required statements. If any member of the commission wishes to declare an ex parte contact conflict of interest advice in the matter. We already talked about this a year ago. Okay. Is there anyone from the audience? Does anyone from the audience object to the ability of the commissioner to make a fair decision? The order of procedures will be as follows. Required statements, staff report, applicant's presentation, those in favor of the application, neutral testimony, those opposed, rebuttal by applicant, final questions, close of the record, deliberations, and decision. The following statements are required to be made at the commencement of the hearing pursuant to the city code and orders 197.7635. Following is a list of the applicable substantive criteria for this decision. That's SHMC 17.100.0418 through F for the conditional use permit. City of St. Helens Municipal Code 17.108.05, 1A through E for the variances. All testimonies, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria as described, or other criteria in the plan, such as the comprehensive plan, or land use regulations such as that found in the development code, which the person believes applies to the decision. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval in this hearing, in person or in writing, or failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the approving authority an opportunity to respond to the issue, precludes appeal to LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals, on that issue, and precludes an action for damages in circuit court. So, Seth, you have a report for us.
I do.
Remind us what this project is about.
I do, Vice Chairman, and I have shared my screen. So first of all, geographic context, where are we in the world? We are on the corner of North 12th and Columbia Boulevard. There's this vacant parcel here. Does not include this half, it's just this half here with these trees on it. It's across Columbia Boulevard from the IGA, known as the Red Apple for a long time. And you have Lewis and Clark Elementary and Columbia River Fire Rescue, various things in the Holton area. And we'll be talking about the site plan here. And before I get to that, so the proposal is for a building with 8 units. Seven of those units are residential, 1 is commercial. And this is a deja vu application. And you don't hear me say that much. And that's because in 2017, in fact, it was July of 2017, ironically enough, same month, same planning commission meeting where we reviewed this the first time. And it's interesting for me to think about, because the last 3 years, have been a real uptake in stuff. And now I can tell you, well, I've used our multifamily standards quite a bit. But at this time, I hadn't used them very much. So I'm much wiser as far as to those standards. And I look back at the July 2017 agenda, and we had 3 multifamily projects. There was this one, the Planning Commission reviewed. There was the Community Action Team ones, which we know those are finished. And then there was the Connex box units on 7th Street, and those ones are kind of plodding along. And the reason this is a deja vu application is because land use applications do not last forever with their validity. They're good for a certain amount of time, and if you're continuing to get through your building permits and stuff like that, you can keep them alive. And when the applicant and I talked about this back in May of 2019, there was still some life in it, but then there was enough inactivity that we had became void, and they get to come back. But it is not without any advancement in the project, because before we had a much more preliminary plan, and a lot of things have been figured out since then, although this is a new application. And so it opens the door for you to do what you do. Nice and vague.
I'm trying to figure out what to do.
Okay, so Columbia Boulevard. Columbia Boulevard has street improvements. 12th does not. We'll be talking about street improvements pretty quick. I don't want to talk about all the details ad nauseum. I want to focus on just some of the more unusual stuff that the commission should be aware of. So the zoning is mixed use, and when we deal with the mixed use zoning district, we have to look at our apartment residential standards. And talking about those standards in a bit. We do have a couple variances involved. There's a variance for reduced yards. So normally, if we're looking at the apartment residential standards for apartments, we would have, this mouse is moving real slow. We would have a 20-foot setback along Columbia Boulevard here. As you can see, there's a 0-foot setback proposed. And there would also be a 10-foot setback here, and there's a 5-foot reduction proposed there. There is also a variance for increased density. The normal density would be 5 dwelling units, and 7 are proposed. And we'll get to that stuff in a little bit more. This is just to highlight some of the things we're going to be talking about as far as what kind of application. So this is a conditional use permit and 2 variances. That's what you're reviewing tonight. And all have the ability to be approved, denied, or approved with conditions. In 2017, they were approved with conditions, which are similar to what we have here, although because the project has advanced, the conditions reflect that. Okay. So let's talk about parking. We love talking about parking, especially when it comes to multifamily developments. So if we combine the parking for the 7 residential units and the commercial unit, and these are 2-story structures. So 3 residential units on the bottom floor and then 4 on top, and with the commercial on the bottom floor here. And note that there's this deck here associated with the commercial unit. So the normal off-street parking requirement would be 15 spaces. And if you were to count the spaces shown on the plan here, you would get 12. So you well, planner, gee, that doesn't add up. But they also propose a disabled person parking space along the street here. It's very sloped. It slopes downhill from Columbia Boulevard. And when we were working on this for the last couple of years, there was some challenges on getting that space, and do you put in an elevator or a wheelchair lift? And this is kind of where the applicant went to resolve that. But back to parking. So 12 off-street parking spaces, 1 on-street parking spaces. So you could see there's 13. And like I said, normally you have 15 spaces. But there is a provision in the code, and it talks about this, where in commercial districts, if you have uses that have different parking demand patterns, then you can consider shared facilities. And that's how we can justify being okay with 12, because you have a commercial which would have, I don't know, was it 4 spaces? How much is the commercial? Let's do our talk with this. Yeah, 4 spaces. So, you know, residential, usually during the day, people are out working typically, and at night, they're at home. Whereas a commercial space will have more activity in the daytime and less in the evening. And so you do have different peak demand for parking. And that's one way to say that the amount of spaces being provided is okay. That was okay back in 2017. And you know, this is your chance to still be okay with that or not. Now, another thing, and we've used this quite a bit in some of our multifamily developments and some of our RV parks. So the multifamily standards have various provisions for private recreation space and community recreation space for the apartment units. But there's an exception to those if you're within close proximity to public open space. within a quarter mile. And in this case, Civic Pride Park, in fact, I'll get Google Maps back up here so you can see this. Civic Pride Park, which is right here around Eisenschmidt Pool. That's a city public park. And as you can see, it's pretty close. About 500 feet away, which is less than a quarter mile. And so we can exempt those. So if you read this in detail, you saw that. That's what that's about. Now, before, at the beginning, I talked about how we reviewed a lot of multifamily plans. And I understand those standards a heck of a lot better than I did back in 2017. And when I took another look at the plans that they've evolved, we have a variety of standards that specifically apply to multifamily dwellings: separation from buildings, separation of walkways from building windows, and stuff like that. And the one issue I saw in the floor plans, which I don't have up here, but there was a couple windows on units 2 and 3 that were facing into this stairwell. And technically, those couldn't be there based on these standards. But I did talk to the building official about it, just to make sure that wasn't going to be a deal killer as far as building code, because bedrooms need exits, and it didn't sound like it would be. So I don't think that's going to cause a lot of harm to the project. All the other basic multifamily stuff is taken care of. Now, landscaping, 15% of the area is required for landscaping for multifamily developments. And the property is about 10,000 square feet, so that's easy math. You need about 1,500 square feet of landscaping. And the site plan gets close. It shows about 850 feet. But the one thing that we kind of drew into is when we look at North 12th Street, and we talk about this in looking at the variance as well. So this is an important thing to kind of think about. So 12th Street is a collector street, needs 60 feet of right-of-way. But the right-of-way is 80 feet wide. And so there's surplus land per se, and you can kind of visualize it here since, you know, we've kind of worked with the applicant on the street design along 12th, where you have the sidewalk and then you have a good bit of land behind the property. If vacated, if the right-of-way was vacated, it would inevitably go to this property owner. So it's not going to go anywhere else. That greenscape will always be there. And so the way this is set up, if approved, is you're okay with this landscaping in the right-of-way behind the sidewalk contributing towards the overall landscaping requirement. That's something to think about. All right, let's talk about street improvements. So if we look closely at this property, we have the classic old curbside sidewalk along Columbia Boulevard. And this is a question that we've asked the commission several times since we adopted the corridor plan in 2014 or 15, around there. And that is, if we have a new development, do we automatically require an upgrade when there's a sound sidewalk in place? And the Planning Commission has consistently said, if the sidewalk is sound and in place, we will not require an upgrade to that. So that's how the conditions are set up for Columbia Boulevard, although the applicant does propose some modification for that disabled person parking space. So that's just, you know, fair game for the commission. And the other thing we talk about in here, we spent a lot of time the last couple of years figuring out 12th Street. 12th Street's funky. It's a wide right-of-way, but there's a whole slew of utilities. And if you're familiar with our collector standards and you're looking at this, you may go, wait a minute, aren't these street trees supposed to be between the curb and the sidewalk, not behind the sidewalk? And yes, they are. But in this case, there's so many utilities within this landscape strip. We ended up saying, well, we don't want to create tree utility conflicts. And so we said they can go behind the sidewalk. And the code does let us do tweaks to street standards under funky circumstances. And so that's what we have here. So that's something for the commission to discuss if you feel like it. But we did spend a lot of time with our public works engineering department kind of figuring that out. In fact, when I was looking at all my own old notes, I saw these drawings kind of thinking about that. So we just spent a lot of time on it. Let's talk about the variances. So the first one is the reduced yards. As I said at the beginning, you would normally have a 20-foot setback from Columbia Boulevard for the apartments and then 10 feet over here. There's always a variety of things we can look at for variances. And I have a couple staff comments. Because you have the commercial suite, I think that helps. If this was commercial alone, you would not have that 20-foot setback. The building could be up to the street. Furthermore, although the code doesn't force it, the mixed use zone doesn't force it, excuse me. But if you go 200 feet to the west, now you're in the Holton Business District zone. And what that zone says is the commercial building has to be up to the street. So to bring the street to the street, to bring the buildings to the street to help create that streetscape. So given the commercial building, Holton's so close, it's not going to look too alien for those apartments to be closer to the street. Another really significant thing to think about is access and how access impacts the overall site design. So Columbia Boulevard is an arterial street. 12 is a collector street. And in transportation planning, we create this hierarchy of streets to look at its standards. Is that street intended for through traffic or is it intended for access? And arterial is more for through traffic, collector is kind of in between. So when we compare the two streets, we definitely favor access off of 12th Street. But we also have separation standards of driveways from streets. And if this building was 20 feet back, given the irregular shape of the property and its smallest size, this access would be forced close to Columbia Boulevard, which is no good. And so from an access standpoint, it definitely makes sense to push the building up front. So I'm sure the applicant has other things to talk about, but those are some of the things that I wanted to mention for the yard variances. Now let's talk about the density variances. So if we take this 10,000 square foot property, the normal amount of dwelling units allowed would be 5. The applicant proposes 7. And I have some of the calculations and how that's done in here if you really want to look at that. So plus 2 units. So are you going to be cool with that? Well, the Planning Commission was in 2017. So some things to think about. If we go back to 12th Street and the extra area that I had mentioned, basically behind the sidewalk and the property line here, that gives you another 1,300 square feet of land. If you throw that into the mix, land that nobody else is going to use because it's right there, that brings you up to 6 units. So, okay, well, and density is all about units per area. So if this is extra area, why not count it? Why not throw it in there? And that actually gets you to 6.2. So, well, 0.2, so it's only 0.8 of a dwelling unit, not a whole one. So if you round up that 0.2, that gets you to the 7. And that's one way to look at it as far as, you know, is this an overkill proposal or is it reasonable? So that's one thing. And we talked about that in 2017 as well. And of course, I'm sure the applicant has things to say too. Now, the recommendation from staff is approval with conditions similar to 2017. If you know in the staff report, you know, I talk about that the conditions are written assuming the planning commission is okay with some of the things I've talked about to make this work. We're using the code and the intricacies of the code. And if you have an issue with that, we may need to kind of retweak the conditions, but we'll see how the conversation goes. But in reflecting on this, it reminds me a lot of that community action team project. I mean, that took a lot of creative code stuff, and this pales in comparison to that one, but it reminds me of, you know, kind of looking at the code and how things work to make this, you know, a legit proposal as far as our development code. So that's all I have to say.
Any questions for staff before we go into the applicants? I had one quick question. So just so for clarification for me, so that the one handicap space would be part of the commercial parking. So it'd be shared residential commercial and the handicap is commercial. Is that what makes it fourth?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So the number of disabled person parking spaces is based on the total parking spaces provided. And 1 through 25 spaces means you need one van accessible space. So conceivably, that space is to serve the commercial and residential units. And the building code says that the space has to have the most direct route. So where it's situated, you know, it does serve the commercial one better than the other. And hopefully it can meet all the building code requirements to access the dwelling units.
So when you're saying the requirement is for 15 off-street parking spaces, that doesn't count if there's any on-street.
That's correct.
There was no on-street.
Yeah, so
Really 14.
if you want to be technical, then it's 12 spaces instead of 15, instead of 13 and 15.
Residential.
Jacob, I have a question. Didn't we recently have a project on Columbia Boulevard where we required that the sidewalk along the project be improved, even though it was basically pretty fair shape?
Improved to the corridor plan standard?
Yes. In the last two.
Oh, the planning commission has never made that determination since we've adopted the plan. The commission discussed it quite a bit for the Haley Place subdivision on the corner of Columbia Boulevard and 6th Street. And the commission, in that case, even though some of the right-of-way needed to be altered, given their driveway location, the commission still found that the existing standard was acceptable.
We also talked about for the veterinary clinic. We just talked about it.
We talked about it several times. The veterinary clinic was the one previous to that. You're correct. And they were able to stay with the old standard too, and it's almost final. You drive by and they're not good.
Okay.
All right. So applicant, do you have a presentation to to make?
Well, a little bit of history. We obviously started this 2017 with rougher sketches than you're seeing now. These are hopefully pretty much plans to go to the city with. Most all the questions have been worked out with Jacob for parking, as you see, and the sidewalks and the tree placement had to be moved because they were on top of the gas lines and all that. So pretty much this is fine-tuned of what we want to continue with. We started out trying to get some Shedco that had a couple grants, so we went after that. So we spent a lot of time chasing these grants that did not come our way, which is fine. That's no big deal. But that's one reason we stalled out on this, and now we're ready to go again. And I think this is pretty much what you see is what we will have.
Russ, are these all above street level?
Above street level?
Yeah.
Yes, you'll pretty much you will walk off the sidewalk and probably down a little bit of grade, but not much. And the first unit will be at street level, sidewalk level. And then the one above will be.
Okay, so the commercial is street level, and then there's a unit above it.
Correct. In Portland, I've built live work, which the first floor was always commercial, and then you lived upstairs. It was very successful. The first one in Portland to do it, although it's a very old concept. But the city of St. Helens has a lot of square footage of commercial space that needs to be absorbed before that kind of concept I see.
Well, I was looking at this like a Renko station, although this is only commercial on the corner,
Right.
where it's right up against the sidewalk, and there's is all commercial on the sidewalk, and then units above.
Right.
Where's the little work one? There you go, first one.
Oh, in Portland?
Yeah.
Northwest Upshur Street,
Okay.
called Kernan's Overlook, was 10 units. They were very large, they were 4,000 square feet. And so there was about almost 1,800 square feet on the first floor. They were zero lot line on the whole outline of the property. And it was quite a gamble, but people that saw them said that's what's they wanted, and we eventually sold them all.
Several units now in Northwest that are pretty much up against the street.
Yeah, the units, there's some on Thurman and stuff. They stole my plans.
Yeah,
I know that for a fact, but
No,
yeah, it got to be very popular, and the city gave me an award and all this stuff, and it's like, okay, but a very old concept of mom, pop, live, work, it's all over, so.
Right. I totally understand.
This I didn't see it viable for having that many commercial spaces, and
No,
someone would come along.
Not at this
And I think being in the close to Old Town with these units, they're market rate. They're going to be market rate. They're one bedrooms. They're going to be for professional people maybe working down here, that sort of thing.
Walkability either
Walkability is going to be great. You've got the fire station, you've got the grocery store, the Eisenschmidt pool, you've got the playground. I mean,
Right.
it's all right there. And
That's why I see it, like you said, live work.
it's a very difficult site, so that's why
Yeah.
things are brought up.
Well, that's
Part
why
of
I
the
was
property.
asking whether you were thinking of lower units and then street.
No, there'd be nothing
I
lower.
understand, it's all above.
It's all from sidewalk on up. Yes.
Because there's stairs going down out of the commercial.
No, that's,
They're going up, I guess.
there's two buildings basically there, and the stairs are in the center of the two buildings. Can you enlarge that at all? Building.
No, I see that. That's not, I'm looking at the floor plans.
Okay, oh,
That, I understand the streets, that.
I can bring floor plans up.
Going up. This commercial space is up.
The commercial space on the right-hand side of it,
Earlier it says stairs up.
Okay, that's,
why I was wondering if it was downstairs and the other one was on street level.
no, those stairs are for the apartment that's above the commercial. So see the two
Oh, I
doors?
see how it works, yeah.
So
Okay.
everybody, there's no shared hallways or anything, which I think,
No, it's a shared door. up to their
You've got-
end.
they've got their own doors, no entryways, so you've got no hallways and everything. And I think,
Yeah, no, I understand now.
the way things are going, it's nice to have your own access and not be in
Right.
hallways, so.
Right.
Actually, I mean, I'm confused about that because that would be in the ground you start from, right? Because this commercial space is below the
2 stories.
residential space.
2 stories, so you're gonna go,
The street level, that's an entrance that
Right, but the
goes
street
into
level-
the back of the commercial.
The residential is at street level and the commercial is below street level, right?
No.
Oh, I see what you're
So
saying.
that's why I was questioning. if
Okay,
it
I was
below.
picturing,
But if I had looked at that carefully, it would be the entrance for the owner of the commercial space, not the general public.
That's
In
a
all
good
probability.
good
Because
question.
you've got front doors on the commercial space. I got it.
Yeah, okay.
That's the entrance. Yes, Greg?
Talk to me a little bit about why you decided to put the handicap parking spot on Columbia Boulevard rather than putting it on one of the parking spaces actually on the site.
well, that would eat up one more parking space for that area. I would be required to put in a wheelchair lift at probably about $70,000 for a piece of equipment that I don't know would be used, but very little. So between that and not redoing the sidewalk there is going to be cheap. That's very expensive too. But I didn't think that the piece of machinery there would be viable back there, and it helped the parking situation.
I don't understand. Why do you need the lift?
Code for handicap accessibility.
The property slope. Yes, it's straight down. I used to walk that all the time, and it's like this.
The
So by
parking,
putting the handicap where it is, it's a straight line basically into the.
the parking lot is elevation wise is about 8 to 10 feet below the sidewalk level.
Yes.
So you've got a 1-story lift almost to get up to that.
I put the topo, we have a topo map with this as well. And, you look here, you're at 110 feet. You go here, you're at 100. That's a 10-foot drop, and not that much of a space. So it is, one of the challenges is the slope.
Why didn't you make parking underneath the building since it was so high?
Rock. Simple as that.
Is there a possibility of commercial parking as well? Where
You mean,
you end that bump out?
well, I would love to see that. Parking all along 12th, or not 12th, but
Columbia.
Columbia. But you asked about
Parking there?
12th.
About 12th.
We've got,
Street parking is
we've
just
got guy wires. There's a, see these little white things there?
Yeah.
Use your, yeah. Those things, it's
Anyway,
That's right, there's.
looked at that with the sidewalk situation, and
couldn't you move the handicap parking down further
which direction?
away from the curb?
The corner?
From the corner?
That would be, what's the distance allowed?
Between unit 2 and 3?
You're still gonna have your sight line. and-
Distance allowed for,
Commercial to the handicap.
well, building code says the most direct route possible, basically. So it's not enumerated, but it's kind of a judgment call.
I think that's why Andrew put it in there. It was,
It's closer to unit 1, which have to have the upstairs, whereas between unit 2 and 3, which puts you down just one parking space, basically, moving it down would be closer to 2 units on the ground level.
Well, if we didn't have commercial space, we wouldn't be required to have it.
Yeah, then you could have that one spot down.
Handicap
The
can't be
one that
one
you
in the
have
same.
specified now for commercial or for
For handicap.
handicap, move the handicap down further
Right.
so that you have that one space for commercial.
Oh, so have a
Two spaces.
You have
2 spaces there.
right there.
Um,
It would be more accessible to building 2 and building 3, or unit 2 and unit 3. And the commercial would be close, commercial parking would be closer to the building.
Talking commercial as a truck that unloads?
Huh?
Are you talking commercial as a truck that unloads?
No,
Or
I don't know how they're gonna unload stuff, that's not my fault. I'm talking customer. Then you wouldn't have to share the handicap.
Well, they're not sharing the handicap anymore.
well,
Questions about the variances. On 12th Street, if there's a vacation, that's a separate process. That's not what we're deciding here tonight, right?
Correct.
But normally when we do vacations, you don't do a vacation for one property owner. The vacation is an expanse. We kind of usually do them scotch. So is this, I'm just, because we're doing a vacation on 12th and then there's 0 setback on Columbia Boulevard and then reduced setback on the back. And so it's like a lot of extra space. And then isn't there parallel parking all the way down Columbia without this development?
Yes,
It's just not painted.
yes,
Because I've parallel parked on Columbia all along there when it's clear full when they're having events.
that's right.
And so I'm not sure why that you would have to do a cut in and not just do an ADA curb cut. And just paint them out, because you can parallel park with that right of way for Columbia Boulevard. It's like you can land an airplane there. So why don't you just leave the right of way where it belongs and make a nice sidewalk and put in ADA curb cuts? The other thing is that the slope parking lot, you can't do, even if they were grade level, ADA lift van won't work if it's not level. So the van has to be level, not just the lot. So that makes sense to put it up there where you have it. Because those power lifts will say, no, we're not going.
Now, we had a conversation about that ADA space, but it was a couple years ago. So I'm trying to remember.
I'm just trying
We
to
did-
figure out, because there's a lot of push. You're pushing on 12th and you're pushing on Columbia. There should be plenty of room for parking and plenty of room for everything, because you push the space as far as you can push the space. So there should be enough room to have enough parking spaces, because what if someplace is a wine tasting room in there and they have excessive parking needs in the evenings and on Saturday and Sunday, and that's when people are home. I would rather have so much parking that he has a hard time, that the places are always rented, as opposed to nobody wants to rent there because there's not enough parking. Because that's a difficult in and out. And I want to make sure that people can get in there, and then you've got school kids going back and forth there Monday to Friday. You want to make sure everybody can park safely if you're going to push the right of ways that far. That's just my opinion. But you can park parallel all the way down Columbia.
All the way down.
All the way down. Just because it's not painted doesn't mean it isn't allowed. I asked Sue, she goes, we don't paint it because there's not enough business there to warrant the painting. But when the tea room was there and they had church across the street, people were parked out and down the street all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to make it make sense, because we put, I don't even know how many tens of thousands of dollars into a corridor plan to hopscotch and patch it together, and that isn't even the corridor plan. So it's like, if we're not going to do the corridor plan, just make sure that what we do makes sense, because it sets precedent, not just for this corner, but for all the corners. Because we have that other one at 6 in Columbia. There's going to be one there at the bottom of Graystone Hill that's half vacant. That when all these things start popping up, somebody's going to want to build. And it's like 10 years from now, I don't want people to go, what in the heck kind of hopscotch, hodgepodge thing did you do? Because that's a that area is very close together. It's really midtown. And this is a chance to make an impact and make it consistent in midtown.
So why we did the insert, I don't remember exactly why, but I remember having a lot of discussion with it. But one of the things we discussed when first brought it up, okay, we're starting to mess with the sidewalk now. So do we try to advance the corridor plan because of that or not? And we discussed this portion right here. And so, okay, well.
So is that kind of a bump out then?
So should it be a bump out? And that's what we kind of scratched our head about. And the reason we didn't go there was the acute corner and turning radii for vehicles.
Just because of the amount of kids that come up that hill on 12th and go to Lewis and Clark, the safer that corner could be, the better. I would rather see him parked from where his ADA spot is all the way down in a nice bulb out. So the kids are safe at that corner and he's got enough parking that he could have 3 vans parked there on the street. You know, that everybody's safe, a nice wide sidewalk. So you'd have a kid with a stroller and you'd have somebody with a walker or, you know, God bless us, everybody be walking up and down the street, living a healthy work and walk life. And there'd be plenty of room everywhere for everything. Columbia Boulevard is so wide at that place. And I mean, we've learned that, you know, in all the conferences we've gone to, the more streetscape, the more stuff, amenities you put, the more people are going to want to go to this business, go to Fresh Northwest, go to all those businesses because it creates that place. You know what I mean saying?
I do. And we really talked about these rights of way quite a bit. But it's been a while, so I'm really have to reach my memory banks. But what I believe I remember was if we just did that bulb out because of the corner, unless you did it also across the street, it's this weird thing that sticks out. We thought it'd cause more problems. And that's why when we talked about the ADA space, we ended up sticking with
I drove
the curb line as it
down
is.
at 6th and West Street a few times when they fixed that. So people learn. Eventually they do learn when you change the corners. I just am trying to think it's an opportunity to do it once and do it right. And it's like, I want every commercial property to have enough parking to be successful. Don't want you to go through all this effort and, oh shoot, everybody in this town has 2 cars. And then the business is super successful and they don't stay because they don't have enough parking. And I mean, if the requirement is 15, loosely field, and it's like, I don't know, it just feels like there should be room to get more parking there.
Where is the sidewalk now? Is it on the outside of the gray sidewalk?
Well, the edges, the Columbia Boulevard is basically, this is the existing sidewalk. This is
Where I can't see your, maybe I
Everything
can't.
but the bulb out.
yeah.
So it's straight across where the ADA is.
Currently, that's correct. Yeah, if we look
So
at
there still is parking along all the rest of
Yes, there still is parking.
Is the bike lane on the outside of the parking?
Well, it's a little tight. You're sort of on the bike lane line.
so if we were a bike fanatic community, whether or not parking would be tolerated there, in my mind, is questionable. We usually don't have on-street parking on our arterial and collector streets. Now, Columbia Boulevard is unique because it is Interstate 5 wide, right?
Nice big.
That's one thing I always thought that should be allowed parking all along there. And there's no sign that says you can't. So
They just never painted it.
you're just
never
crowding the bike lane a little bit. And, you know, if the bump out makes it friendlier there, that is a busy corner being invested in that corner now. Knowing how kids and people coming up from 12th
Into
there,
the store, going to
into the store. I mean, that's a very busy crosswalk.
when the food bank opens, that you're a hop, skip, and a jump from the food pantry.
I mean, as far as what would change the handicap situation that we drew there then, that would be the scenario?
Well, I mean, we'd have to rope Public Works into it because it's a public street, and we would just have to, consider disabled spot without.
How wide is the street there? I mean, at Peninsula Park in Portland, that thing is parked all the way around, and they have 2 ADA spots, and all it is an extra wide curb cut, and they are street parking. They're not cut in, because that's the problem when you cut it in like that, unless you have bollards or you have something else that kind of does something. When you cut it in, there isn't enough room to get the wheelchair up because the wheelchair is so wide, and then you've got other people, and it's like, I just don't want to see you lose space. I don't want to see the sidewalk lose space.
Do they have to cut it in, Jenny?
I don't think
I
they
don't
have to.
think they would have to.
I think they just need a
They
curb
just have
cut.
to designate the.
I think you paint it
little
correctly.
sign that's about this big.
Well,
It has blue writing on it.
but I don't know if the building code is going to be okay with a brand new development with an ADA spot and a standard curb.
No, cut. He has to fix it. He still has to fix the curb.
Still have the ramp there,
You still have to
but
have
it
the
isn't
ramp.
recessed on in.
Yeah, you have to have it. You have to do the big wide one with the bumps. In Portland, they do them like this, and it's low in the middle, so it accesses both of those cars can both use that route.
How did the corridor plan fit in a bikeway and stuff in there?
There is an excerpt in the staff report.
That gives an idea how they're going to get parking.
The way the corridor plan is, the cars are supposed to be put parallel out here, then the planting strip, and then the bikes. So it's like, so then the bikes are really protected. Is that the way it is there? Because that's the way it is on Plymouth.
That was on one of the plans.
Yeah, it's every 6 blocks that thing changes. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
That plan is not.
I know down the hill, Springs Hill, it was
Oh, yeah.
the airport.
There's a number.
So they changed it there, but
But if we have the chance to fix busy corners, I would rather fix a busy corner and end up with a couple more parking spaces.
Yeah, I agree.
This is
You
your
can't
corridor
mark any
plan.
of them commercial anyway.
This is the attachment in your.
If you have parking there and then someone tries to pull out of the handicap, they can't see the traffic coming because they're already behind a row of cars.
Yeah.
You have the bulb out and the handicap's right behind the bulb out. You wouldn't be cutting the parking space in, you'd be bringing the sidewalk out. So then it creates like a little shelter in that first spot. So you're still, and then it'd be standard parking behind them, but then the ADA spot is just first. And then you have that nice little spot that nobody can park in front of them. And then just right there at the end.
Visibility too.
looks like the corridor
I think
plan
more
is actually
Visibility.
taking
on
up
my
some of the
phone.
parking.
Well, it doesn't call for,
The parking.
there's no parking on this block.
Oh, is that what it says?
There's,
Well,
you see tick marks here, but there's no parking.
Oh, they squeezed it all in. Because they have that thing in the middle.
Yeah, for some reason. Now, these things can
That's
change.
because of this
parking spaces.
but they really changed the school pattern.
Stopping at the vacant lot.
Yeah, so it could end up being
I see,
different.
that's
It would
a,
be about 6 spaces.
Yes. And we considered that bulb out. That's what I'm talking
Counting the
about.
ADA one.
Propose that, do we require that or not?
And well,
but I mean, you could do this and. who
on
knows,
front of
maybe
Red Apple, there's all the parking
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Part of it, the corridor to school. And it's gonna fix this, and this
It'd be nice to have a
because this.
commercial on
this crossing
our
is
side, because if they park at Red Apple,
Better.
which would be more convenient, walk across the street, jaywalk.
Hard to know how long that we're going to be in this COVID mess. But Red Apple is using that curb for customers to have park, and they bring out the groceries and the car, and the people drive away and never going into the store.
Half of Red Apple's curb is mountable.
Yeah,
So
so
you can just drive right into the parking lot
Yeah.
from the street.
Yeah.
We're almost into deliberations here, but we're still talking about its design, so.
Well, it's just Columbia Boulevard is such a pivotal part of the community. You want to make sure you get the right plan, not just a plan.
Yeah, well, I don't want to talk about deliberations, but the only thing I would ask is, because we haven't talked about amongst the group whether we want you to have the corridor plan or not. If we ask for the corridor plan, would it fit in your design? In other words, can you make the corridor plan fit in your design?
Well, I just have this one here and I haven't looked at the corridor plan for this section.
You have the picture with the trees?
I have a picture with the trees, but that would just be tearing everything up and
I think
a block.
I think it actually is using the existing sidewalk location and pushing it out and trees out where the parking is. Looks like to me.
You can't put the trees
Pavement
behind the curb. I mean, you'd have to be behind the
It
sidewalk.
looks like
in front of the sidewalk according to the corridor plan.
That's not,
the curb bike lane traveling.
Okay. But no parking here.
you can't keep the sidewalk.
As to why that couldn't happen.
It's not very friendly to commercial development.
Right. Okay. Any more questions for the applicant? Greg, do you have anything?
No.
Okay. So, do you have any testimony in support of the application? Anybody with neutral testimony, either in favor nor against? Anybody wants to testify in opposition to the application?
This is your chance.
Not again. Okay, we don't have to do a rebuttal then.
Those people look awfully familiar to me. Nepotism is alive and well.
Hey, it's a family affair.
Yes.
So if no further questions from the commission, no further response from the staff, the public record is closed. This matter is-
Well, Mr. Chairman, according to the graph that was included in our packet, which shows the riverfront district corridor segment right in front of that property, there doesn't look like there's any parking going to be allowed on either side of Columbia Boulevard at that area. And if that's the case, we need to think of how this particular project is going to handle the handicap parking. Or do we modify the corridor segment parking area along that section of Columbia?
To remember the plan is a guide and it's not quite the Bible.
But do we change an entire plan for one project? I mean, this plan goes all the way up Columbia Boulevard. And if we're going to allow parking there, then we've got to change you can't pick one section of Columbia for parking and then say the next block you can't have parking. You have to make it either or. Yeah, there has to be some kind of reason for the entire section of roadway.
Parking all the way up and down that street.
That's the only block they don't have parking.
Isn't it exactly the opposite?
According to the diagram that was included in our packet, this goes from about 12th Street down through 11th Street on the map. And it does not show any parking on either side of Columbia, including in front of the grocery store, which now allows parking there.
They've always allowed parking there.
Well, yeah, well, I'm just saying the proposed plan that the city came up with apparently does not.
Have all trees.
Jenny, is that the case? Did you
I
eliminate,
think so. I think
you
it's
eliminate
more-
all the parking in the corridor?
I think there's
It's not gonna,
As Jacob said, it is a guide. It is not a build document. The
And
concept,
how much did the city pay for this guide? And you're gonna throw it out for one project?
well, before we go down that road, when we have rubber stamped development after development to not put in this plan, and this corridor plan went to public committee, it went to those planning commission, everybody looked at it multiple meetings. It was not done by one person. It is not a blueprint, and it's up to us to massage it and make it work, because as we all know, we have a rock issue in this town. We have a topographical issue in this town. You can't plant certain trees. Some places, right there where he's developing, the city tried to plant trees and they ended up in those containers because they couldn't get trees planted. I mean, you have to look at it with where what you're dealing with.
Sounds like a terrible idea for me to eliminate parking along a commercial area.
Yeah, I mean, it's, in theory, a green treescape seems like a good idea. And I think that's the spirit of the development I take is, and if you look at the plan from the applicant, there are trees in his plan. You know, he's dealing with the landscape, he's dealing with the shape of the building and the spirit of the code, and he's landscaping accordingly. He hasn't vetted buildings right up to Columbia Boulevard and a concrete wall. There's landscaping there. And that's what the spirit of the plan is, in my estimation.
Well, except that the spirit of the plan has multi-use pathways for bicycles and wheelchairs and enough width for that.
Right, but he's not eliminating the bike lane. He's not out into the right of way. Columbia Boulevard's still an airplane hangar.
What's
He's
this
not,
yellow, is it a median, like just created by paint?
it's like just a refuge, if there was more development, turn lane. Because you have buses and different stuff that happen there in front of the school.
I'm not arguing against this project because of one parking place. What I am suggesting is that before the planning commission considers allowing a handicap parking spot on Columbia Boulevard, we better get a nod from the city council, which approved this concept not more than 2 years ago.
and how soon will they implement it, Greg?
We're going to start making changes on a citywide project or a citywide plan. We need more than just the planning commission's approval. My suggestion.
Well,
We've seen a lot of these plans. They never come to fruition.
I mean, I guess my question is to you, Jacob, because you, the builder, different people have discretions, make staff recommendation based on the quarter plan that's in the packet. I mean, you looked at the quarter plan, you looked at his plan, you had other conversations, and you make your recommendations based on that. So I mean, if staff recommendation is staff's recommendation, correct? I mean, that's pretty comprehensive. You've looked at all the rules and the codes and the plans that we have and made recommendations accordingly. If you felt like that you could park on Columbia Boulevard, it would have been flagged as a non-issue. Correct?
Yeah, we did spend a lot of time thinking about this and the corridor plan. And I know the applicant was nervous when, well, God, we may need to require bulb outs. And, we had a good long conversation with Public Works about this and along 12th, because they both have unique circumstances. And, things are constantly in flux. Let's say this development gets built like this, and you have this disabled person space here. It doesn't necessarily preclude this plan from occurring, but it may have a modification to have a disabled person space on that block. And maybe that's the only on-street parking space.
Well, that was my conversation with the veterinary clinic. I like the corridor plan. I think it'll make our city look very livable and very pleasing to the eye to drive down the street. And I was uncomfortable even then with at what time do you ever enforce it? Is it when you get millions of dollars to do all the whole street and everybody's businesses from a grant? Or you have it, you know, project by project as they come along. And we said, you know, it's a really big expense for this property owner because he had like the veterinary clinic had 2 long sidewalks on both sides. It's in good shape. So we're going to go. But I guess I feel okay with that as long as the project doesn't alleviate or obliterate the possibility for the plan to ever happen in the future when monies can be put aside for the whole street.
If the plan isn't done all at once, it's gonna look all piecemeally.
Well, I mean, there's that chance you go on a lot of streets around here and they got a sidewalk in front of the duplex and there's no sidewalks for the entire block.
Well, I agree with the sidewalk, but, you know, looking for a bike lane on the inside and parking on the outside for 1 block.
The bike runway, raceway,
Yeah,
I think I'd try to do a chunk at a time, but
You know, it's hard enough to keep the bikes off the side. I don't know.
I guess for me, I think the sidewalk could be widened in the future, and it would include that as long as the trees weren't too close to the sidewalk, and it would still work. Bikes were on the sidewalk.
This corridor plan is all about using that extra wide right of way. So we still have the right of way.
Yeah,
And that's the first thing.
yeah, we're not taking anything away that can't be used.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I don't see where we should have to do anything other than what he's doing.
The corridor plan all happens in the right of way.
Boulevard for the bikes or whatever.
I mean, he's gotta do 1 block in the corridor and it's gonna look ridiculous on its own.
Look to it, that would basically be the same.
This is more uniform with the city.
Chances are the corridor plan will start at the ends, you know, up by the Chamber of Commerce,
That's what I'm
where
saying.
we know things are really weird for pedestrians and vehicles are like. There's a lot of problems there functionally in addition to aesthetics. And that's a gateway feature too. And so that's a prime place for it to start. Also down here, given the waterfront redevelopment, First Street. So you could have bookends and then we'll see how it builds from there.
Yeah,
So since the wording is closed, I can't ask the applicant. Let me ask you, if you wrote it here. On page 8 of 20, you said there are 14 trees, at least 6 inches DBH. Applicant proposes to preserve about 3 to 4 trees in the northeast corner of the site. And then the next sentence says, no trees are proposed to be saved.
Oh, that is because, good catch. See, he's reading.
yeah, I've got it.
So
I remember that from before.
in 2017, he was trying to save some trees. And grading is a lot of times the killer on saving trees, as I've learned through a lot of the big projects we've had here. And that's what happened. The grading just like, well, there's no way to do it. So that was a leftover, and I can update that in the findings. That was on page 12.
8 of 20.
Oh, 8, I'm sorry.
The dust doesn't work out there. The preserve the dust, he's going to take it on.
Yeah, that sentence. I thought I caught all the old stuff, but you know.
Oh, because I kept looking for where the trees are and it seemed.
So yeah, none are proposed to be saved now.
No secret trees.
But the plan does show the minimum amount of trees for the mitigation of those lost.
So does anybody have anything you want to talk about with the variances?
So I want to go back to the parking on Columbia. How is the commission leaning?
Leave it as is, but put in an ADA parking spot.
As it's proposed?
As long as there's parking all the way along Columbia Boulevard, yes. In the street.
Does that have to be approved by Public Works?
It's parking there now.
Not on that side?
Yes, there is. You can park there. When there's an
You cannot
event,
park on that side of Columbia Boulevard.
you can. When there's an event at the church, well, I guess it's not a church now, but whatever it is, they park all the way along there too. It's just that there isn't enough activity up there to have parking or a reason to park there before.
So how will the build out work if people are parked along the street? Does it not, John?
Well,
How do you get your van in there?
there is,
Just go around the car and then in a whole car width.
and I don't know, maybe that parking is tolerated there, but wouldn't normally be allowed. That's possible. And it hasn't been an issue, and that's why it's not yellowed. Sometimes when development happens and it's looked at closely, more yellow gets on the curb. And if you compare the yellow curbing along the Holton Hole with what was there before that was developed to what there is now, you'll see a whole lot more yellow. And there's a lot of standards about what's supposed to be parking and not on the streets. I don't know all of it, but there were some things into play on that one.
When the owner of T10 came in to council and asked about having her parking spaces marked for her business, because we don't do that, it was reported in open testimony that there is parking allowed on Columbia Boulevard. So even though it is not painted as such, there is parking there. There is no parking signs, and even it doesn't have to be painted to allow parking.
Isn't there parking on Columbia in front of the veterinarian office?
I'm not sure about that. I can't speak to that, but
When
the
I went
T10
there,
that testimony.
I have to go check on where the trash is being located, because it takes up 2 parking places if you go look at.
The Holton Hole?
Yeah,
There's street parking on
Columbia,
3 sides.
yeah.
But if you went out there today, you'll see more yellow curbing than in the past.
Okay, because
that just
this has been maybe 2 weeks ago, because I
Okay.
was asked if I would go look.
Yeah,
Is that a visible triangle?
one is, no, the vision clearance doesn't count. And I don't remember the explanation. So I'm not Public Works, so.
But maybe it bears clarification, because I know that, I can't remember her name, came in here and talked about her frustration about events happening, because her busiest days are Sundays, and the church would have the big events, and then her customers had a place to park. And so the comment was made that there is parking allowed on Columbia Boulevard. It is not prohibited.
Yeah.
So that comment happened in a hearing. It was part of Public Works testimony. So it's not my opinion of whether there's parking there. It was actually an answer to a question.
Yeah. Well, I did not prepare that thoroughly with this because there was so much discussion in the past. So I don't have all the
What
answers.
we're deciding today is the variances on the setbacks, though. We're not deciding his handicap parking, are we?
Yeah, the main thing is you're focusing on is the shared parking concept that gets you down to 12 from 15, because you're the decision-making authority. You know, that's one of the things you have to be okay with.
Yeah, but if there's parking along, there's a whole bunch more than one on-street park.
The parking is satisfied with what's on Columbia Boulevard.
And in our Riverfront district and our Holton Business District, the code says that on-street parking may count towards your off-street parking calculations, but the code otherwise says that on-street parking does not count. This property is zoned mixed use, So the on-street parking is a bonus, but it does not meet the basic standards that we're supposed to review.
But it is a block from being in the area that would count it.
It is very close, yeah, 200 feet. Yep, it is close.
And part of the reason why with the setback variance is happening is because it's so close to where the setback is. What is the setback for commercial in Holton?
0. It asks to be 0. And so that's one of the things to think
I mean,
about with the variance.
We used that for back up the variance. So why couldn't we also, by the same standard, if you're going to use that to back up the variance, you use that because of the parking? Because the parking is not required that in Holton, street parking counts.
Sure, you could use that
If you're going down that road of this is the continuation of Holton on one variance, why wouldn't it be the same on the parking?
and that could be, and that's a good
I
point.
mean, it's like it's either one or the other. You wouldn't have it. You can't count it, but you can count it in here. It either counts for everything or it counts for nothing. See what I'm saying?
I do.
If you're bending it one way for one thing, I don't know. It just seems like it's, if you're going to bend it, you want to be consistent with the bend.
So if you could certainly take on-street parking into account as far as the, the shared element.
Can they do a condition of pending resolution of the ADA parking space? Is that a condition? Because it sounds like they're not fully vetted in the ADA space.
The ADA space is a wild card. I don't know if that's going to create a problem with the building code as far as its distance from residential units. This got so far, but it hasn't got to the building official. And we've had 2 building officials since this project, and I've picked their brains about it, but it still hasn't got to them for the specifics.
Official review.
So there's still some potential wild card in that space, which I hope doesn't create some new issues.
That's why I thought it could be a condition. Resolving the parking be a condition.
Sure, yeah.
I just thought because there's things they can't know tonight, and you don't want this to push it back. It would be better to have it be a condition of resolving XYZ.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of the decision being flexible, you may want to consider in your findings that 11 spaces is adequate, because if for some reason he needs to put that ADA space within the boundaries of the site, it's going to take up 2 spaces. So it's going to reduce you down to 11. And so if you're going to condition it from a flexibility standpoint, that's probably where you want to go. Unless you want to take,
that might be the best way to address it. I'd go along with that.
I agree.
Is everybody on board with that kind of fun? I know you haven't made any motions yet, but
Yes.
it'll just help me with the motion assistance.
Just so I'm clear, as part of the question, whether this, where the sidewalk jogs in for the ADA parking, is that overkill, and would we allow them just for that to go straight and just go through?
I think in that case, the condition could be consider the curb line as is for your disabled space, if possible, based on all the other stuff the city has to look at. I think that's the way you would want to approach it, because we can't trump Public Works' view on their street, right? And we are considering some alternative stuff, which has been partially vetted with Public Works. But you just say, well, we really think you should look at it this way. And that way it's not a slam door condition, but it conveys the commission's thoughts and desires. And maybe it would help it move that way.
What you're saying, if Public Works says no parking along there, you've got to put it on the site. And we'd have to approve a variance for less parking.
Yeah, and And because this has been vetted with Public Works quite a bit already, I think they're going to be okay with this as it is. You know, they still haven't seen the civil plans, but in concept they are. I think it's going to be the wild card is the building official and building code review of that space in relation to those residential units.
I guess we could always go with your proposal, go back to 11 spaces as a minimum, just in case we need to put that handicap parking spot back on site.
It sounds like everybody's on board with that kind of finding. Now, of course, these deliberations may evolve to where you change your mind, but that's where I see everybody right now.
Yeah.
I think so, on my part.
It's the safest safe harbor there.
So conceivably, you could recommend, as approved by staff, with the finding that the shared parking would permit 11 spaces and to consider using the existing curb for the ADA space if possible.
We can't vote on it yet because we have another variance to need to add into it.
Yeah, you have the two variances and
We've done 2 votes before, but we cleaned it every one.
yeah, so you have 3 decisions, 2 variances, 1 conditional use permit. And because if one of the variances, well, if the variances are denied, the conditional use permit is in a world of hurt. So you should probably address the variances first.
I guess so. The other variance.
So it's the yard requirements and then the increased density.
I'm supportive of the variances.
So.
Plan 2.
Does that equate to someone making a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, well, the variance issues are resolved.
We have to make a motion on the conditional use. Discussion.
Anything else, Greg, on the conditional use?
Well, no, I just think that we just need to add that language in regards to the parking.
So 11 spaces for shared parking is adequate.
Yes.
Yes.
We'll make a motion on that.
So moved.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Motion to allow the commissioner, the vice chair, to sign.
Opposed? Who's in favor?
It would be the vice chair in this case.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Right. I guess you got your project there, sir.
You know better. This was supposed to be 20 minutes long.
I'm still in charge. Any more?
One that does
Final written-
higher.
I got one more last thing to say. The final written decision, the appeal to the city council. The notice of decision will be mailed to all persons who testified or submitted comments. The appeal deadline will be included in the notice. Great. Next thing we're going to go over is the Riverfront District Architectural Guidelines Recommendation of Bennett Building Transom Windows. That's a fun project.
Okay, so everybody should be familiar with this project. We've talked about it quite a bit. And it's been another busy development year. And this was at the forefront of happening, it's kind of challenging to have time at all to think about it. But June came along. Well, God, look at this. We have time to think about it now. So I was finally able to put this together, show you the standards, and we know that based on the vote that happened March or April, it was March, there was a vote that said, okay, the issue was nobody likes the transom windows as they are. So what we're trying to do now is get into some details to see how we can fix this. Now, if we look at the basic standards of our architectural guidelines, you know, this is the one that hurts. Original windows are to be maintained. Obviously, that did not happen. And, you know, that's the environment we're looking at. But I had several questions, and, you know, I'm not going to read this. There's some pictures for you to compare, and you've all had this in your packets. But there's several questions so that we have direction on what path to take. And this project ends up being more than $5,000, then the city council has direction expenditures. So I put together a few questions to at least get the dialogue started. It can certainly be more than that, depending on how feisty you feel today. So I'm just going to go question by question and see where the commission's at. So the first one is the easier method just to see. And if we try painting the transom windows to achieve the appearance goals, and you can use multiple colors to give the illusion of narrower mullions. Is that something that this group feels is a potential option?
No.
No. No, not so good.
That does not surprise me, but I had to ask.
Too flat, there's no relief on any mullions or anything.
Actually, that's the question.
So the next question is the type of glass that we should use. Right now, it's typical see-through glass. And the original glass was prism glass or treated glass. I don't know if those are the same things, but you know what it looked like. You have it was kind of opaque and smoky with texture.
We don't know what it looks like exactly.
I have the glass, with the exception of the, give it to Jennifer. Yeah, I have the glass, with the exception of, there was, I believe 2 broken panes. So
That's what was the catalyst. It was broken panes. It wasn't just replace windows for 5. It was broken windows is what started it.
I honestly would have a problem with modern reeded glass. It would have a totally different look than, I'd almost prefer clear glass over going with a modern reeded.
What did the other glass look like? Describe it, because I didn't see a chunk of glass.
It was super textured. So you know how, you have any idea what reeded glass looks like now? It almost looks like bamboo shoots
Okay,
in the glass. I mean, that's only,
Yeah.
but it had a whole bunch more texture than that in it. So, and it almost had a
texture
type thing, or was
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Just on one side?
You know, I don't remember on.
Yeah, typically it's just.
Normally it's on one side.
So if you have 1 or 2 broken, then. So,
I did not take the broken ones when
Okay.
John offered them to me. I just took the,
but if we replace those, then you still wouldn't have enough.
and I don't know that we could match that. I'm having trouble in my building matching antique glass.
Yeah. Plus this one elevation I see here, the picture, they have put air conditioners on either end. So we'd be missing more glass trying to use yours.
Because that's probably taking 2 spaces.
So we would have to probably start with new glass or something.
Yeah.
I guess it's the glass issue.
I guess I'm not opposed to it. It's also for workability with inside the building as to
What's
something
the
that's not
problem with the
readable.
read or something else that's not clear? Even if it's not exactly the same?
Readed glass looks really modern.
Yeah, it's
You know
modern.
what I mean?
Okay.
Like
Yeah, I do.
modern almost, so.
So typical clear glass then would be the preference on glass type in this case because of the difficulty in replacing and matching.
Wouldn't opaque be even better though, Jennifer?
Say that again?
Wouldn't opaque,
You mean translucent, you mean, not opaque, it'd be
not
a
translucent.
piece of wood.
With the glass, would it help to have a very light tint put on
I think you can have it tinted without looking like tinted glass, can't you, Russ?
You go to different degrees of tinted, but there are hundreds of different shapes of glass. You might find something that would be acceptable, and this is up high.
Not just read it.
And if it's complete, not trying to make up a few pieces here and there, then it'd be fine. I know at the reed glass, you see it more and more now. Builders are thinking, oh, reed glass, put that in, so it's sort of getting a little back. But there's a lot of glass. We can get some samples if that's the direction to go.
When my manufacturer builder did my front storefront, he brought in a big box of all kinds of glass I could pick out of between chicken wire glass, what I'm trying to get is pebbled chicken wire, which is hard. So there was lots of different opportunities there. So.
Yeah, even down chicken wire, you get polished wire, and the chicken looks down to little squares. You could do something interesting and make it work.
I'm not really ready to toss out some type of texture at this point.
Even if you can get some kind of wavy glass, like it's in. I noticed the one window that they broke on the city hall, and they replaced it with modern glass, and the rest of the windows are wavy glass, and then you have that modern glass in there. So I don't know if that's an option, even getting something that looks like old wavy glass. But having samples of something.
I wonder if the Restore over on Albina would have. I know that's where I took my windows when I had them replaced, and it was all the old glass.
Do you think the height of the transoms, would the wavy glass be that noticeable?
To some of us.
The light hits it differently, so.
Yeah, we know about it.
You're gonna be there when it light hits.
I can see the value of having it not darkened for, better lighting inside the building, but does it have to be clear? I'm not so sure.
Let's say glass to be determined, because then you can look at samples.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
You gotta make decisions on, you nixed the first one, so now we're on to, looks like building some new sash there.
So it's not just the glass, it's also the frames around the glass that.
Yeah, and we'll get there, because those are some of the mullions. We'll get to that question.
We skip to the next question then.
Yeah, to be determined there, okay.
So texture, no texture, it's open.
Right, sample.
I don't think we
sample.
need to make a decision on that. If we're talking new windows.
It's just, I guess I'm looking for parameters, and I mean, if to be determined's fine, but just to help us move in a direction.
Clear is going to be cheaper than some type of texture. So if you're talking about money's cost, that's going to be.
Well, if you're gonna replace those with wood sash, you're talking money, so you might as well get the glass that's gonna work.
Let's get it right.
You just Leave what's there and be done with it.
So to be determined on glass type.
Yes,
Clear shaded, textured, it's all fair game.
yes.
Okay.
The right size, the right. I'll say opacity.
Can I ask a process question?
Sure.
Just general, not specific to this, but as just a possible property owner, business owner, if I saw this or was aware that all the hoops you have to jump through and all the ways that people are going to pick apart everything you do to your building, it might drive me to a different neighborhood. I would just want to make sure that we have a process. When people, if a home is not on the historic register and you don't see a plaque on the front of your home, you can live on an old street and not be held to that standard, correct?
That's true.
I mean, because there's lots of homes that are not delineated. You know, you can drive around and you're like, why is this one on the list, but not this one? So I just want to make sure that we're not being anti-business, because there's a lot of homes going down here that might want to put a new porch on their house. Are they going to get, you know, raked over the coals when they try to put on a new front door on their house?
Well, I think we've had these architectural plans for several years now, and I've never had the impression that people think we're getting beat up. In this case, it's the city.
Well, I heard
And
a
it's-
little bit about it, about the building across from the dockside. I heard some rumblings in the community about what they went through to make the improvements on that building.
Mm,
And so now that was not the city.
yeah.
And so some of people had some feelings hurt about that building and
see.
felt like they had to bend over backwards, and they thought, we're making it a beautiful, prettier building. We're trying to do better. We're trying to,
We know who owns it.
well, regardless, it's a policy that we're setting.
Accents on it.
It's a policy that we're setting. And that isn't the person I heard the complaints from.
We'll talk later.
So, but I mean, I heard things that people just hear metals in the streets. And so I just want to make sure that we're consistent on, if you're on this list, it's this. If you're on this street, it's this. That we do the process right.
And that's why we adopted the standards and a process, because before it was very willy-nilly.
Right. And I know that this is like 6 ways of wrong, but you know, I'm not saying that this is right by any stretch, but I just want to make sure that we're moving forward. When I talk about people that you're going to look at catalogs and that the planning commission is going to decide what kind of window goes in there, I just kind of want to make sure that we're in the right place.
Yeah, sure. And of course, this is a recommendation from the commission.
Okay.
Now, me as the planner, I don't want to be on the bad side of the commission. But I'm trying to be the middle person on these standards, your views, and how we deal with what's happened, which is just so fun.
Going through that process though, now on this side, I think there is a clear process to go through. You have architectural standards and
Right. You throw the cart before the horse in this particular situation. But lots of customers in our community get the cart before the horse. Lots.
Yeah, well,
It happens a lot, not just the city.
finish the cart before the horse.
Yeah, lots of people have done it. So anyways.
I'm not real comfortable with going down each question and then deciding on that question. It could be that what is down below here really colors the second question, you know. It's not going to be a divided light. So, anyway.
Yeah, I just try to think of all the types of things we would need to consider and put them on paper.
So
So,
it's maybe, you know, maybe to speak to her, what's most important architecturally is that it's shaped right. The glass type may not be the most important but if you're going to ask us specifically, we're going to tell you specifically what we want. But if we have to make a decision, a big round, big decision, then maybe we compromise someplace so it looks right, whatever. So.
well, that brings us to divided light. That's number 3. And this is something that the guidelines aren't very specific on. Of course, if you maintain your original windows, there's a divided light. That's the way they built them. And is that of great value to you, or are you open on divided light or not divided light if it has the right appearance from the exterior?
It goes to the next question. So if it's,
Divided light.
So does it look like the separate windows? Which one is-
Are they actual separate windows or do they just fake separate windows?
Yes, you actually have separate panes that are installed with the mullions that support them versus one pane with just a veneer that gives the illusion of true divided light. That's the difference. And I hadn't even heard this term until February or March. And I've never used the word mullion either, so I'm learning as we go.
Whoa. But it kind of goes to the next question of what type of materials this thing would be made of. If it's going to be wood windows, then if you're going to pay money for wood windows, then it's just true divided lights, you know. So
Sure.
that's why you can't pull a question out of context. Anyway.
Well, we can jump to a different question if you would like, or
This four questions seems to be the bigger question.
that is a significant one.
Overall question.
Yeah. Well, let's go to 4 for now then. If everybody's okay with that. So this is the size, division, and shape of the windows in relation to the previous. Now, of course, the standard is to try to retain that as much as you can. In this case, we have varied width mullions, and with some, I mean, it's symmetric overall, but there is some variation. And if you're looking for it to be more uniform, that does drive a lot of the other things. So what do you think?
Is there something besides wood and air of possibly weather better than what?
Well, if you're going after a color, you're going to be limited there. I mean, you can do aluminum frame. There's a 3M product that we use a fair amount that you can put it on, let's say, a fake mullion that's wider. It could be put on there and it sticks to the glass. It's the same product that's used. When you look at these new houses, they're all insulated glass. Those are all fake when they're all glued on, basically. So something could be done to make those lighter.
Would we allow that in a historic house though? We wouldn't.
Well,
Because I remember doing the one over here.
yeah, no, I'm trying to save Matt's.
I was just.
But does the spirit of the code say it has to look original or it has to be original? No, the
Code
spirit
said that they should have, which didn't happen, we all know, they should have maintained.
What if there's a fire? Does somebody have to go track down and recreate the windows?
Yes,
Somebody
definitely.
has to recreate the windows, or they could get something
No,
that look.
no, you gotta recreate it.
Okay.
Insurance will
I
pay.
just want to make sure that, not the specific, because this is your set precedent. It's like for anybody else that's in the historic district, does it have to be exactly the windows there, or does it just have to be
Exactly.
really? That would definitely be a deal killer for some people.
First one I went on, and
Super expensive.
when it was,
Seriously looking would.
Okay, well, based on that, if we look at number 4, then you're saying that the size, division, and shape of the new windows should relate to the previous as much as possible.
very definitely.
Okay, well, that was a lot of yeses.
One thing I was very surprised to find was, I noticed reference to Anderson windows in here, that having them built, the cost was very similar to having a high-end Anderson window in. So it wasn't, I don't want to have this go towards the easy and just have to compromise with what's appropriate when the costs could be similar to getting really true divided. And they literally brought in 10 separate windows, installed them all, but the way it should be done. And
Going along with what Commissioner Pugsley just said, I would we're not experts in this, we have a list of questions that we're flailing to answer because we just don't have that expertise. My recommendation or my suggestion would be to go to and find someone. We know the year the building was built. Find a professional glass company that has the ability to come in and give us a recommendation on period replacement that would be as close to what the original was as possible. I mean, we can sit here all night and make suggestions, but we don't know what's, period and what isn't. And that's that's the essence of trying to get this resolved, is that we want to get back to as close to the period of when the building was constructed and to continue the architectural integrity of what the original building had as possible. And you're only going to do that with an expert that knows their product. That's my suggestion.
Like Acroform or somebody coming from Portland to.
Versatile sash.
Yeah.
Do it all the time. That's what they do.
Well, we have to start with, it needs to look like the original, then
Yes.
how we get there may be to have a company that has products to meet that. What does that mean?
Start filling your piggy bank. It's not going to be cheap.
And that's where, some council input will be involved. So, okay, so size, division, shape of new windows should try to match the original as much as possible. That tells me that the mullions, as far as their width, should try to match the original as possible, which were pretty thin.
Yes, that's right.
I don't think they were made of wood. Of course, I didn't look at them that close, but I know if you look at the bay windows, the main windows, it's a thin metal mullion, and I believe they're original. But so you're not as concerned about materials as long as it looks okay and we don't use vinyl.
Well,
I
does
think
say-
that's what was
That
said.
might be a little
and materials should
simplification of,
retain.
but you're headed the right way, I think.
I think we wanted wood, didn't we?
I'm concerned with, what,
Yeah, it's
So
wood.
wood would be desired.
Yes.
Not desired, that's what's wanted.
Okay.
Desire sounds like a wish. This is a want.
It seems to me the materials should be retained.
Yes.
Language in here.
what it takes to keep up that.
It's not that bad. If it's done right, it won't be that bad.
Instead of preservatives nowadays.
Yeah, the finishes they've got now.
Our old town here is a gem. And we've got businesses that are polishing that gem all around us. We need to do that for our city hall too.
Well, I think I have the input I need, unless there's any more comments.
Well,
If you feel like I didn't ask something at this point.
well, I've got a question here. You sent us this one that's all marked up. What is this brick bit?
Oh, and that was just, I was just explaining the history where on before the March meeting, Matt showed us a rendering by Group McKenzie, and we had a 5-minute over-the-counter review, and that was all the markings. And I specifically in the memo said, well, let's talk about the transom windows, because that'll probably shape what we do for the rest of it, because I know they are talking about doing more than just that. Although I think one of the things that the commission talked about before was try not, well, don't replace those original tiles.
No.
It's such a huge.
I looked at them
feature.
tonight. They're in excellent condition. There's some glazing on the black row at the bottom on a couple tiles. There's one crack after that many years.
They
That's
needed clean and repaired. They don't need to be replaced.
the route's in excellent shape.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be
No point.
sin to get rid of that.
No point.
So the money that you save on not getting rid of that, you can put toward the window.
There you go.
Now, what about are those original doors still there?
Are they going to recess those doors?
Recessed.
They're recessed already. Are they? This is just an architectural agreement. But what I want to know are those doors still there? They were there for the water bureau, and that's why I'm wondering.
They've not been changed in the 20 years I've been in the law.
Because this green scheme down below.
If everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's water.
So, I mean, that's one thing. Because if they're doing a redo, we would probably redo the doors and make sure that they have kick plates and some other things. And if you look at the Group McKenzie examples, you can see that's one of the comments we had was one, make sure that that's recessed like it is now, and make sure we have, actually, I don't think we addressed the kick plates very well in the comments now that I look at it, but certainly.
All doors are there, the kick plates are
I
all.
don't think the old original doors are there.
They're fine.
Does anybody notice the new courthouse doors?
Yeah.
They've just replaced their aluminum doors with beautiful wood doors.
I haven't looked at it yet.
That's what the cones are out there for.
Yeah, well, you have your, that goes to the commission next month.
We're all colored.
After the fact,
We informed Casey Garrett of that and reminded him of the city situation, although he did say that we were probably further behind on ours than theirs. But it is an after the fact one, yes.
but it sounds like they're doing something right as opposed to something wrong.
Right.
Look who they house up above.
Yeah. They kind of have the
Museum.
historic patrol in the building.
Yeah, they have their local authorities. So as far as materials, we're talking about wood or original materials, because there is metal on those bay windows that frame them in.
If those are original, right?
I believe so, yeah.
So those don't need to be changed. So what, we got, is McKinsey hired to see this through or what?
I don't know, we'll have to round out with Matt.
No, they were here doing something else and really.
Shaking his head no.
They're not restoring guys.
They were not hired to do that. No, they were doing other work already under contract for the city and they just did that real quick.
Yeah, it was, well, let's kind of, it was a quick attempt at damage control.
We're talking a lot of changes here, but we need to hire a qualified conservation architect.
We're saying what's there is good as opposed to changes.
Well, the doors
If
came up, but yeah.
Yeah, part of it is if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Now, I know our utility craftsman, or whatever his title is, sorry, Roger, if I got your title wrong. He's concerned about those original windows being guillotines. Guillotines,
So they fall out and slice your head off.
Which ones?
the bay windows to that building.
They're not tempered is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Well, then you call a glass company and have them make that decision. They can put stiffeners in there, or you could replace them. They're high enough, they don't have to be tempered, I believe. And, but that has to be looked at by a glass person, so.
yeah.
Which windows are you talking?
You're talking about the big, large ones.
We're talking about bay, we're getting off the transoms a little bit.
I just want to make sure we're gonna have the opportunity to address all the changes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no permits for those other changes. In order for a building, when a building permit comes in, we get that building permit and then we go to this group and talk about it before the work starts. And I think that's all known, that process now. So this shouldn't repeat itself. So yeah, you'll have the opportunity.
You should be able to use the same glass company that's going to help you with the transoms to give you some input on the bay windows.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
They're not good glass companies.
And possibly the doors.
Do you need a motion?
This is, I think I got the message from the commission. And I don't know if, Matt, do you want to say anything before we conclude on this or just chat about it tomorrow?
I just had one question for the commission. In the original pictures that Les sent out, the frontage and the windows around the transium and the bay, it's painted white. Do you anticipate the city to go back to the white, or do you like the darker scheme, something that is in the historic guidelines that we would present back to you?
I prefer historic guidelines.
So you're okay with not original on the white color?
Jennifer, you're on.
I think we would refer to the historic.
The historic lines. Yeah.
Okay, and if we're likely going to be spending more money, I would advocate for doing something to the bay windows as well. So would appreciate any comments, and I can review what comments you said earlier about the bay windows. But if we're likely going to be doing all this work, I'd hate to not address the bay window issue, just because we're going to be in there doing the work anyways. So.
And do we know the condition of the cornice? It looks like it's a metal cornice above the transom windows. Have they evaluated the condition of that?
No, we have not. No, we basically put in those windows that are in there now as kind of a, let's get something in because we've got to remove these broken ones. And so when we went through that process, it was basically, we have to replace 2 or 3 panes. Do you just replace one side? And then if we replace just the utility building side, it was, well, it's going to look really freaking weird if you do just that side and not the other side. So it was, well, okay, let's replace all the top ones. And then we got them in, and it was kind of, obviously then you saw what it looked like. Then after that, we just kind of said, all right, we're not going to do anything until we get everything approved through the proper channels. And I would appreciate any comments and thoughts that the commission has that are appropriate and in a little more pleasant demeanor than I've heard from some commissions members on this city project. I take it personally.
Well, I think you need to focus on finding an architectural firm or one person that can give you the historical requirements that need to be done on that building. Yeah, instead of going ahead yourself, not being qualified for that particular project.
I never said I was qualified. We were going based on the guidelines, and what was presented to you in the picture by Mackenzie was based on those guidelines and our best representation of what it would look like when we were done. Those Mackenzie drawings were also based on the architecture and colors that were done on the real estate building that Commissioner Pugsley owns. So those colors and those choices were made based on what she chose on the building. So that's why we chose. That's why you see on the picture that the darker color tile replacement, and we're happy to try and clean and preserve that as much as we can. And I agree that we should try and preserve that. My worry is that if we start cleaning that anyway, we need to make sure that we hire the right person to do it, and that more is not going to break off in the midst.
You need to come together with a scope of work for design. And then that design can have the scope of work for contractors to go out for bid. Pretty simple.
Reach out to Restore Oregon or the SHPO office, and they probably can come up with a list of contractors that are experts in the field.
We've been trying to do that for the last couple months.
Like anything you take away, the middle, I think of it as a cornice that goes across the top. I believe it's metal.
Yeah.
Remove any of those details, the building changes. So
Yeah, and there was never any plan to remove that part.
if you get in there and that's.
You need to make an assessment of what's going on.
Yeah. We already know that we do have some roof issues there with birds' nests and everything going underneath there, going underneath the roof in that section. So there's a lot of work, and my fear is that as we get started in this project, it's going to get bigger and bigger, and we're going to find more and more issues. So that's my fear as we start going down this road, just FYI.
Like a reasonable fear.
Yeah. How are you gonna What's your plan to hire somebody? Just call McKinsey again?
No, Mackenzie was a very, like Councilor Carlson and Jacob alluded to, Mackenzie is already contracted to work on the plans for a new police station, and they did some of our park improvement master plan pictures. And so they were asked at the last minute to kind of come in before I presented to you as the council or as the planning commission to give kind of a picture rendering to you of ideas of what it would look like in the future. So it was a very rough drawing and done very last minute. We were at the 12th hour giving it to Jacob to say, hey, what do we need to change and how quickly can we change it before we present it to you to what our interpretation of meeting the guidelines was. And I understand that was a quick turnaround, and it's obviously not something that you as a commission wanted to see. So we're very happy to go back and work through those changes and get it right. This is a public facility. It is right on the waterfront. We do want to make it right. Our intention is to make it right. So it was never made of any intention to do this improperly or make it look like crap.
So you're going to put a request for architectural.
That I'll probably have to talk with the city council. We have this on kind of an action sheet discussion as it's one of the projects in the strategic plan over the next couple of years to finish. So how they want to move forward, I will try and get their recommendation, because going out for an architecture firm, even for this building, is probably at least $5,000-$10,000, if not a little bit more, with all the architecture standards and the materials that are requested by you all tonight. So it gets pretty expensive pretty fast, and that's not even digging into the building of what potentially could be the aftermath of finding stuff out.
I think it's probably the way people feel we have to go, just so it's brought up and, taken care of in the beginning.
Yep. No, I by no means and take full responsibility for it not getting to the planning commission, and that is 100% my fault, and I will take responsibility for that. So I'm happy to take the fall on that.
Taking it forward, and then we'll fix it.
I was trying to find a quote that I referred to in a previous meeting that talked about how important heritage tourism is. And we go back to how blessed we are to have this enclave of beautiful historic properties. We have to treat them appropriately. So, and sometimes it gets expensive.
Jennifer, what were the materials of the doors made at the county? I haven't been able to go over and look at them yet.
Oak. I think they're some kind of oak.
Would something like that be, if we had to replace the doors in the atrium area of that utility building, would that be something?
My building, and I know the county, they were in looking at my doors. I walked around and there's several buildings that this particular Doty, who designed this Bennett building that we're talking about, they still have their original doors. The gray building, they're all over town. You can see the doors, so it's pretty easy to pick it. So,
Jennifer, are you available at your office during the week sometime?
You just plan ahead. I'm only open by appointment only right now during COVID. So, but I'm happy.
Okay.
To meet you.
If you're okay with that, I would love to, as we kind of continue moving forward with this, with plans and potential going out for an architect or something, it would be great to have someone on the planning commission be a part of that to help kind of guide us, because I'm still a little fuzzy on a few things, and I'm sure Jacob will go back and look at his notes and have some great comments that we can feed on. But if we're able to have somebody close by that can kind of guide us in some of the light, that would be great to be on that little project team, if I can ask you for that.
Be happy to. My pleasure.
Bad Boys Pizza, those doors are the original.
I think so. Yep.
Yeah.
All the way down.
Yeah.
To McCormick Building. I mean, you could just.
Bad Boys got 3 sets of doors there.
Okay, well, thanks for sitting through some of our boring planning stuff, Matt.
Oh, that's okay. I can sit home and dinner and drink wine.
And that was productive. I appreciate everybody's comments on that item.
Anybody have any discussions about any of the planning director's decisions previously emailed? Planning Department activity report. Exciting read.
Yes, I hope it always is.
Maybe for your information, I did items to talk about.
I'm not going to think about. We did recently approve. Well, this is probably. Well, this may be in the next department report, but we approved the grocery outlet proposal on the old Violets Villa site by just south of the medical center. Yeah. So that is proposed, and they're sometimes don't tell them, but they're not saying be secretive about who it is. So yeah, grocery outlet proposing to go there. They also had a drive-through proposed, but the plans for grocery outlet were way more advanced than the drive-through, and I had to deny the drive-through. If you want to see why, I'll show you the plans, but it just didn't work at all.
So I have a question about the grocery outlet lot. Just recently, they cut all the trees down, put all their dirt in there for the apartment complex. Seems unfortunate because we can't address the tree preservation codes for a lot that hasn't been developed yet.
Yeah, and it was the same issue that we had with the medical center, and that was given the grading needs, how do you preserve trees within? And with the medical facility, we were able to get some trees on the north end, and I had a beg for them to figure out to at least save one tree. And I really wanted to get some of those big oaks visible from the highway saved, but it just didn't work. And the legacy people, they were really honorable. And we were able to get an elm saved. For these lots, you're right. There was grading issues, but in working with these folks over the last couple of years, I believe they've been very forthright about changes and about trying to preserve the trees as much as possible. I don't feel like they've given me the runaround on those items. And with the subdivision, we still have that inventory, and we'll still be able to make sure that they replace at the appropriate ratio.
They may not have been able to save any of the trees because it wouldn't be very buildable lot where they were located, but they weren't developing that yet. They just used it for a stockpile for soil for the apartment complex. So
yeah, that
was not a grading issue at all. It was just a convenience issue.
It was a little bit
Premature to me.
a little premature, yes. But they have been forthright on a lot of stuff, including trying to save the trees elsewhere.
Keep track of the inventory, say, yeah, we'll pretend those trees are still there.
And we can because of the subdivision. That subdivision, that was a moment in time.
Right.
So we can look at the subsequent development.
We create the trees, but
And if you look at the overall picture, because some of the trees, I think one of the weaknesses of our tree inventory is it doesn't address tree health. And so some of those, there's this tree right here. But then in the end, it's halfway dead already. So some of the trees we wanted to save just didn't make sense. But if, once it's all done and you walk around, we still have some of those nice big oaks and other trees that were preserved. And I think it still meets the intent of the code. I don't have bad feelings just because of working with them, and it's actually been pretty smooth. And sometimes, you know, actions are clearly shyster action. And I'm not seeing a lot of that with this one. Hopefully I'm not wrong.
I have two things I'd like to bring up. I want to just go on record as saying I think the city and the county and whoever else were involved, they did a fabulous job on that Gable Road. It is just outstanding. And I've been fighting for that for 20 years. And I think that project just came out perfect.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it was that's a good one. You know, whenever we get safe passage on major streets,
Especially that street. The other question I had, Jacob, is some years ago, the city had a beautification award that we gave out every year to a project that really was outstanding. We haven't done that in a number of years, right?
first came on, and I think I still have my notes, and we did that in Klamath Falls, and what happened is it just became too routine. And it's beautification awards. I think there's some value there, but it shouldn't be done every year because it then becomes routine and, well, we'll just pick this person. If the city does something like that, it should be based on a wow factor. Like, wow, look at that. We should acknowledge it. But it should be on a case-by-case basis. And when someone does a project and goes over and above for beautification, I think that's when it's warranted.
Well, I got to tell you, if I could vote, I would vote for the veterinary clinic. Because for so many years, for decades, that site has been unusable because nobody had any kind of vision as to what could be used, how that property could be utilized. And here you had somebody come in with an idea, and I'm sure it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it just turned out so beautiful.
Council Carlson is a counselor, and she hears you. And in fact, there's a council meeting tomorrow.
Lots of good stuff has been happening. Lots of good stuff. It's been a long time coming.
But that by far was a superb project.
Where's the big residential project across from Walmart in progress?
Oh, that's an excellent question. We got a message from Nina Reed, who's the chair of the Oregon Housing Board or something.
Noah, isn't she?
Noah. There's like several agencies, and I'm confused about which one does what, but they got state funding. So there's going to be some state partnership involved. So it's moving, and I think they're working on funding right now.
Regional Solutions team.
And this is like the latest news. In fact, I just wrote that in my department for next month today. So they've been working on funding. They got that, and
Solutions team is the governor's office heads it, and then it's multiple agencies are a part of it. It's to help kind of grease the skids to keep big projects moving along. It was one of those kinds of projects.
Do you have an update on what is at the old hospital out there?
Oh, Graystone Estates?
Yeah.
Graystone Estates, that is the 80-lot subdivision out by the DMV, Columbia Commons area, 78 residential lots, 2 commercial lots. It's moving along well, and we have a builder who's really chomping at the bit to get started.
Oh, good. And then any word about Millard Road crossing?
ODOT is working on final design. That prompted us to have a conversation with them about the entry sign. And that's as much as I know. But it's actually moving. It's just not, well, we'll do it someday. So it's beyond concept to design.
Back to Graystone Estates, I was driving around there trying to see what they were doing with the southeast corner access towards Meadow Park. What's happening with that? It's just like a dead end.
They talked about seeing if they could extend the street. They are not proposing to. It is just going to dead end there. But they are going to have a secondary emergency access off one of those side roads on the south side, or the southeast side. One of the roads paralleling the highway.
Oh,
One of the frontage roads.
that's where you talked about having a walkway.
Yes, yep. I think it's going to be a walkway / emergency access.
Can we go back to the Bennett building just for a sec? Is there any grant money like the Main Street grant or anything that we could apply for that could help finance the restoration of the building?
Main Street grant, the big Main Street grant has been gutted due to lack of WADO funds.
Did they do CLG?
CLG, certified local government, for anybody watching
That's
this.
the historic stuff that we've done before.
That is possible. That would at least put
Because we did some restoration work on this building
we did.
with the CLG grant. And
Um,
this year, did we cycle it out to the community this last?
This
time?
last year, we helped fund the theater sign in conjunction with the Main Street grant. And so we have to wait 2 years for the
But
next
that might-
cycle.
But that might be the right size target for that building.
Yeah, I'm suspecting Matt hopes this doesn't drag on for another 2 years. But if it does, that could be an option.
Right. But it could be part A and part B,
Yes, that's true.
you know, because that might be where we're looking at with just the economy and budget tiers. We're going to have to be looking at a lot more things as part A, part B, part C.
And there may be other grants too that I'm just not as familiar with. It's certainly something worth looking into.
On some money.
Look under your pillow.
Mr. Chairman, are you looking for a motion?
Yeah, do we have a motion to adjourn? Everybody done talking?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.